Understanding planetary aspects can be one of the most challenging and confusing things to learn about when it comes to astrology. Not only does it require that you understand all of the different pieces of the puzzle individually, meaning the planets, the zodiac signs, and the houses, as well as the meanings behind the individual angles, but it also requires that you have a deep understanding of the different components, the different qualities that make up each one of the zodiac signs. It also requires the ability to think for yourself and synergize all of these different pieces in order to create a cohesive interpretation for the aspects. No wonder this is where most students get stuck and give up completely when they start learning astrology. In this video, Stella and I will walk you through the 5 major Ptolemaic astrology aspects, including how to start forming your own basic interpretations for these aspects, and of course, we're going to have some chart examples. As a prerequisite for understanding what we're going to be covering in this video, you should already have an understanding of the individual significations of the astrological planets, the zodiac signs, as well as the different qualities that make up each of the zodiac signs, meaning the modality, so cardinal, fixed, and mutable, the elements, meaning earth, air, fire, and water, and the polarity or gender, so masculine and feminine, and how these different influences, these different qualities actually inform the significations of the tropical zodiac signs. It will also be helpful if you have an understanding of the astrological houses, and you will need to already have an understanding of how to form your own interpretations for the astrological planets within each zodiac sign. If you don't already have this foundational knowledge, but you want to learn how to interpret planetary aspects and everything else in the birth chart for yourself, I definitely recommend checking out the Cosmic Academy of Astrology. The link to do that is down in the description below. We even have a free demo version where you can access our module on the 12 houses, so you can get a feel for what it is we do in the Academy, which is very comprehensive. And even if you do already have this background knowledge, you probably still want to look into the Cosmic Academy of Astrology, because if you're here watching this video, it's for a reason, and that reason is probably because you want to learn how to give astrology readings. Well, the Cosmic Academy of Astrology gives you that and then some. You're going to learn how to interpret the birth chart, interpret aspects layer by layer, everything you need to know. You're going to learn how to interpret things that are more complicated, like house rulerships, transits, make predictions using solar and lunar returns, secondary progressions, annual perfections, and so much more. The link again is down below. And also, I'm going to be going even deeper into each individual planetary aspect along with aspect patterns in a future video, in a series of future videos actually. So make sure you subscribe to my channel if you haven't already done so, so you never miss an important astrology update or a new tutorial. All right, so in this video, I'm going to be going through each planetary aspect individually, but first, there are a few things that we need to make sure that we're on the same page about and that we understand to provide context before we jump into each of the individual 5 Ptolemaic aspects. First, you need to be aware that there are 2 ways of looking at planetary aspects. First, there are degree-based planetary aspects, which means that they are exact in their angle within a certain number of degrees. These aspects are stronger, much more potent, and they're used by every astrologer everywhere. Second, there are what we call sign-based aspects. This is when planets are in aspect based on the sign that they're in, but they're not exact by degree like they are with the degree-based aspects. These still hold a lot of value, and they're used in a lot of traditional forms of astrology, including traditional Hellenistic astrology, which is something I study, practice, and teach. However, those aspects that are really far apart and that are not super exact by degree, of course, will not be as potent as the degree-based aspects. The second thing we really need to be aware of are the sign qualities. Many new astrologers don't realize, and actually many seasoned astrologers don't realize, that the different qualities of the zodiac signs really inform the meanings behind the zodiac signs. And so you should be able to actually understand a zodiac sign without memorizing its own individual significations, just by knowing what modality it is. So if it's cardinal, fixed, and mutable, what element it's in. So if it's earth, air, fire, and water, and what polarity or gender it is. So whether it's masculine and more active, or if it's feminine and more receptive. The other thing that a lot of astrologers don't realize is that these qualities of the zodiac signs inform the way that the planetary aspects are manifested, especially when we get into the individual aspects in the individual signs. It gives a layer of nuance, and it helps you to understand how these planets are working together or working not together and incongruently in the case of more challenging planetary aspects. And so if you don't already have a deep understanding of cardinal fixed and mutable, of earth, air, fire, and water, of masculine and feminine, definitely check out the Academy. I also have a video I'm going to float somewhere up here for you that you can stop and watch first. We will be touching upon this as we go through each of the Ptolemaic aspects. However, I'm going to assume that you already understand these things as we go through each section by section. Finally, to get the whole picture for interpretation when we're looking at planetary aspects, you also have to understand the condition of each of the planets in what sign it's in. And so if the planet is in its exaltation or its rulership, it's going to be a stronger influence in a more positive way. If a planet's in its fall or its detriment, it could be weakened, or it could express itself in a way that's more difficult or challenging. And so we have to understand these things as a part of the entire picture of the planetary aspects. The other thing that we have to understand is the difference between malefic, benefic, and neutral planetary energies. And so just to bring everyone up to speed, the benefic planets are Venus and Jupiter. The malefic planets, which means that they impose a more challenging energy and have the ability to say no to things, versus the benefic planets, which are more harmonious, more positive, more expansive. They bring ease. They have the ability to say yes to things. That again is Venus and Jupiter. The malefic energies, the malefic planets, are Saturn and Mars. These two planetary energies pose more challenges when they're in any aspect, but especially when they're in challenging aspects, which we'll talk about, like squares or oppositions. Finally, there are planets that are considered neutral, that are typically not good, not bad. They're just kind of there, but they do end up getting altered by the energies of the benefic and malefic planets. And so these are the two luminaries, so the sun and the moon, as well as Mercury. In addition to these three planetary energies, the outer modern planets, so Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto, are technically neutral. Malefic and benefic are designations that are reserved for the traditional visible planets. So that's Sun, Moon, Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn. And so now that we're all up to speed and we're on the same page, let's get into our first planetary aspect, which is the conjunction. So a conjunction is when two planets are very closely aligned with one another. A sign-based conjunction is when two or more planets are in the same sign together. A degree-based conjunction is when two or more planets are near each other, usually within 10 to 15 degrees, depending on how big of an orb you give that conjunction. Some astrologers use tighter orbs, some use looser orbs. For me, for conjunctions, I use at least a 15-degree orb, and I do also, of course, look at sign-based conjunctions. When two planets are in a conjunction with one another, their energies are melded together in a way that's almost inseparable, where they become sort of operating like one unit. It can be very hard to pick apart those energies and separate them because they're no longer separated. And when two planets are in a conjunction, the qualities that they have in common are all of the same qualities because typically they are in the same zodiac sign. That means that they are operating together as one unit cohesively in the same element, in the same modality. And if they're in the same element, that means that they're also in the same gender or polarity. So they're either masculine and active, or they're feminine and receptive. Conjunctions are considered to be neutral in their influence. So they're not inherently positive and they're not inherently negative. They're just kind of in the middle. And the way that they express their energy, the way that the energy of any conjunction manifests and impacts somebody or their experience, has to do with the two planetary energies involved. So if it's benefic planets that are involved, the conjunction is going to be beneficial. It's going to bring a lot of ease. It's going to bring, good fortune. conjunction, it's going to bring opportunity. If it's malefic planets involved, it's going to bring hardship, difficulty, restraint, discord in some way. If it's a mixture of both beneficial and, malefic planets involved, then you're going to get a mixed bag, or one of those energies is going to overpower the other, depending on which is stronger based on the sign placement. Neutral planets are not qualitatively positive or negative, so that's the Sun, Moon, Mercury, and then the outer modern planets, which are, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto. And so the way that those planets are expressed depend on the other planetary energies that are impacting them and the way that they are manifesting within that conjunction. And so an example of this would be, the Sun with Saturn, which I'll give you guys in a second, could be the Sun being influenced by a malefic energy, an energy that can bring hardship and challenge, which is Saturn. The Moon with Jupiter could be the Moon, which is our emotions and our subjective sense of reality, being influenced by this energy of Jupiter, which is very optimistic and expansive, and it brings opportunity maybe through intuition. And so because the neutral planets are not going to necessarily bring a positive or negative energy into the mix, although we also really need to look at the condition of those neutral planets, because Mercury in Pisces is going to bring a little bit more of a difficult energy than, let's say, Mercury in Virgo, where it's at home and exalted. But in general, just looking at the planets themselves, the neutral planets are not going to be positive or negative. You really have to look at the condition of those planets and the other planetary energies involved in the conjunction. They simply reflect the significations of that planet that's involved, or they are altered in some way by the other planetary energies. And so I'm going to give you an example of an actual chart where we're going to look at a conjunction between Saturn and the Sun. So the chart you're seeing up on your screen has Saturn and the Sun, along with a bunch of other planets in a stellium that we're going to ignore for right now, in the first house in Sagittarius. This energy with the Sun is made a little bit more difficult or challenging by the nature of Saturn. Saturn with the Sun can bring difficulties or challenges around getting recognition, around finding one's path or one's purpose. It can make someone very perfectionistic and self-critical, especially in the first house of self. Because the Sun represents the father, it can also represent difficulties, limitations, and restrictions with a father figure or with a relationship with the father. Because the Sun represents the soul's expression of purpose and physical reality, and because the Sun is such a core part of who we are and the way that we show up in the world, it's like the core of our personality. It's our connection to our soul or to our spirit. With Saturn in the mix, it alters what our soul is trying to express. It gives us an additional layer of understanding or meaning behind that. And so one of the things that this chart shows is that this person came here to learn responsibility and to become more responsible, more self-disciplined, more regimented in some way. Even though this person is a Sagittarius, they have to work hard, they have to be more grounded and more down to earth. And typically when you see a Sun conjunction to Saturn, especially in the first house, it indicates that this person had to take on a lot of additional responsibility at a young age. And so those are just some of the manifestations of those two energies and how they show up together. With this Sun-Saturn conjunction, it's almost like this person has a blend of Sagittarian and Capricornian energy in the way that they express their sun sign. And so it's not just a clear-cut Sagittarian, jovial, adventurous, flying around, doing fun things type of energy. There is a little bit of a somber energy here, or a melancholy energy here, or a weight that this Sagittarius has to carry of additional responsibility, of wanting to have things go right, of wanting to perfect things, because that is a Saturnian quality. It's not just Virgoan to want to be perfectionistic. Strong Saturn placements bring that as well. So the next planetary aspect we're going to be discussing in this video is the square. By degree, squares are 90 degrees apart. They form a right angle in the birth chart, and there's an orb typically given of about 6 or 7 degrees. I give it about 7 degrees, maybe even a little bit more depending on the planets involved. By sign, squares are always going to be planets in signs that are 3 signs away from one another, and they're going to be in signs of the same modality. So every square is either a cardinal square, a fixed square, or a mutable square. And whether the energy is in cardinal, fixed, or mutable is going to tell you a lot about the challenges that are faced between those two planets. And so in the cardinal signs, there's usually some degree of crisis. Cardinal energy is all about initiating things, and it feels with these cardinal squares as if every initiation is some sort of crisis, even if it's not necessarily a crisis to other people. With the fixed energy, there's this energy of stagnancy and not wanting to move on from something. And with the mutable energy, there's an energy of mutability where things are constantly fluctuating. And part of the challenge can be trying to deal with life when there are all these constant changes and fluctuations. And that's part of the challenge of the square. The thing that the squares do not have in common are their element and their polarity. And this is very important to note because this is going to be the major distinction between the challenges and difficulties of a square versus an opposition. And so because they're not in the same polarity especially, there is a disharmonious energy here where one planet wants to do things in a way that's more masculine in astrological terminology. In astrology, masculine means active and engaging and actually doing something, putting something in motion, whereas the feminine signs, the feminine energies are more receptive and subjective and passive in nature. And so one planet wants to do things in a way that's really active and more masculine, where the other planet in the square wants to do things in a way that's more receptive and kind of lackadaisical. And so those two energies are incongruent. They're also not going to be in the same element. So you're going to have one planet in one element and another planet in another element. And the most harmonious energies in astrology have, first off, the same polarity, but also that same element. And so with the squares, these aspects represent a major area of friction where two planets are rubbing up against one another in a way where they're just not getting along and they're inhibiting the other planet in some way from manifesting in the way that it wants to, or they're creating their own unique circumstances of challenge in that square. And because this is a disharmonious energy that represents a major area of friction in a person's life, they're considered to be one of the most problematic or challenging energies in astrology, and they're actually experienced typically as more challenging than an opposition, although that varies depending on what the planetary energies are that are in the square or opposition, which we'll talk about in just a second. And part of the reason for this is because oppositions have polarity in common, which we'll talk about, whereas squares do not. And so they are just dealing with this difficulty that is assigned to them based on their modality, cardinal, fixed, and mutable, without any commonality or common ground from the element or polarity to help them work together in some way. Squares involving the malefic planets in the birth chart are typically going to be the most challenging because the malefic planets, which again are Mars and Saturn, are the most challenging energies. They have the ability to say no, put a stop to something, and in a square, they tend to bring out their most difficult of manifestations. When it comes to benefic planets like Venus and Jupiter, these energies are typically not experienced as being very difficult when they're in a square. What typically happens with the benefic energies in a square is a little bit interesting. So objectively, the events that unfold, the connections they make, the things that manifest that are represented by that square with the benefics seem to turn out in a way that is inherently positive. However, the person does not subjectively think that these things are positive because they typically have elevated expectations in the area involved with that square. That square, depending on whether it's Jupiter or Venus, can also make a person lazy or overindulgent in some way where they overdo things. And so the negative manifestation of that square is maybe having inflated expectations, being lazy, overdoing something, being indulgent in some way. However, when it comes to worst case scenario square energies, these are way less problematic than the malefics, which tend to bring sometimes things that are very tragic or traumatic or challenges that are insurmountable in a person's life. Whereas the The benefics tend to be a person getting in their own way, whereas, things externally are actually pretty all right. When it comes to the neutral energies, so sun, moon, Mercury, the outer planets, it really depends on, what's going on there to the degree of how difficult it's going to be. But squares are always challenging in some way. And so even if there's no malefic energies involved, a square between the moon and Mercury is going to have the moon, which is your intuition, at odds with your logical thinking mind, which is Mercury. So there's always going to be some sort of conflict between these two energies. And squares really do represent some sort of conflict. It's where these two planetary energies are not working well together. Okay, and so I'm going to bring back up my chart example for the square aspects. And so in this chart example, you can see here that we have Venus in a square with Jupiter. Venus is in the second house of finances, and Jupiter is in the fifth house, which is the house of joy, fun, spontaneity. It's the house of hobbies, interests, passion pursuits, things that you love to do because you love to do them. And so Venus in this circumstance is not inherently negative. Venus in the second house can bring ease when it comes to finances. However, with this Venus in the sign of Capricorn, which is not necessarily the greatest placement for it, in square with Jupiter, which is kind of an overinflated, overindulgent energy, this can lead to overspending. This can lead to, grandiose purchases. And for this particular chart and this particular chart and this particular person, what they have experienced is spending a little bit too much money in a very generous way on gifts, but gifts that are typically very practical, very usable, very Capricornian, but they do tend to be quite lavish. This is someone who, when they have money, they spend it. And so, not necessarily a bad thing, because with that Venus energy and that Jupiter benefic energy in the mix with the second house, the money's usually there, but they do tend to use it for things that are fun and that they want to do and that they want to experience, or they tend to use it to give back to other people or to show their affection to others, because Venus in the second house, the love language is going to be providing gifts, giving people actual physical things. So let's move on to the opposition. The opposition is when two planets are literally how they sound. They're in opposite signs and they're opposite one another. This aspect is 180 degrees. The orb that most astrologers give is about 10 to 12 degrees. I give it a much wider orb of about 15 degrees because I find that it's still very potent and powerful. And I do, of course, look at sign-based oppositions as well. In a sign-based opposition, the planet is going to be in its opposite sign of the other planet. And so an example of this would be the sun in Sagittarius in opposition to Mars in Gemini. Any planet in Gemini is going to be in opposition to any planet in Sagittarius, and that's going to be especially potent if they're in that opposition around 180 degrees, give or take 15 degrees. And so as I mentioned in the square aspect portion of this video, these two planets are going to have modality in common. So every opposition is going to be either cardinal, fixed, or mutable, but they're also going to have their polarity in common. And so they're either going to be masculine or feminine in nature. This seems to work out where the two planetary energies do have the ability to create balance or compromise in some way, and they both act in a way that's either active or receptive, either forceful or passive, right? That's that masculine in astrology versus feminine energy. I'm not talking about human gender. And so what they don't have in common is their element. They're not going to be in the same element of earth, air, fire, or water. And oppositions often represent literal opposition, where there's something that's opposing the ability for one planet to manifest its significations or the other planet to manifest its significations, or those two planets and those energies are really at odds with one another in some way. And that can absolutely be the case. There's a difficulty to maintain balance balance between two areas of the chart or two areas of a person's life. They want to have everything in one area and everything in another area. However, they are able to find balance and to compromise, to find that middle ground, or to merge those two energies together in some way in a lot of circumstances. It's going to be easier to do this, of course, if the opposition involves benefic planets and benefic signs, or benefic planets in, you know, their home signs or in their exaltation, I should say, versus malefic planets that are in their fallen detriment, or any planets in their fallen detriment. And so just like with all of the other planetary aspects, you really have to look at the whole picture. You have to look at what type of planet is involved, where is that planet in the sign, how do these two planets work together and work against each other in the opposition itself. So when it comes to the energy of the opposition, because there is this need to find some sort of middle ground between the two planetary energies, many people will often swing too far to one side and too far to the other side before they reach the middle ground. And so, you know, it really depends on where they're at in life and what's being activated or where they're being pulled, where that manifests. But there's always this other energy kind of trying to pull them out of, or pull them away from, or stop them maybe in their tracks, or cause conflict, you know, if it's Saturn or Mars, which Mars represents conflict involved. And so, like I mentioned before, if benefic planets are involved in the opposition, this can bring really beautiful things. It's not necessarily usually negative. It can bring overindulgences. It can cause you to want to overindulge in two areas of life. It can do the same or similar things that it does in the square aspect, but it's not going to be inherently negative. And typically this is objectively seen as positive from people who are kind of external to the situation, and even to the native who has the opposition. They see these areas of life as being lucky or beneficial in some way. However, there can be an energy of an overinflated sense of expectation, overindulgence, things of that nature. Whereas malefic planets, so Saturn and Mars, can bring literal opposition or literal conflict that prevents somebody from finding that balance or getting what they want or manifesting something in some way. Neutral planets, of course, are not qualitatively positive or negative. They simply kind of reflect the energy in terms of challenges or benefits of the sign that they're in, of the other planet that's in the opposition, of other influences in the birth chart. And so basically they're going to be kind of giving you their significations. So if Mercury is involved, then obviously communication's involved. Your intelligence, your thinking patterns are involved. But it's not necessarily a positive or negative thing. However, if Mercury, let's use that example again of Mercury being in Pisces. If Mercury is in Pisces, then there could be a lot of difficulty in the area of, you know, thinking and expressing oneself effectively, because Mercury, you know, tends to have issues in that area in the sign of Pisces. And so I'm going to bring up a chart example again for the opposition so you can see what that looks like here. I'm going to keep using my same chart example. And so this person again has a benefic opposition. So there is an opposition between the moon, which is on the midheaven in the 11th house, and Jupiter, which is on the IC, you know, by 10 degrees, so close there, in the 5th house. And so the Moon-Jupiter opposition, so Moon in Libra is an energy internally of a lot of balance when it comes to the way a person experiences and expresses their emotions. Typically, someone who has the Moon in Libra is going to be cool, calm, and collected even under, you know, the most extreme of emotional situations. However, with that energy of the opposition with Jupiter, this indicates that even though they do sometimes have the ability to maintain balance and equilibrium emotionally, they experience emotions very strongly and very powerfully. Because this is a benefic energy with Jupiter, this can also indicate enhancing one's intuition. So this can be somebody who has a very strong intuition, a very powerful internal guidance, right? A very powerful internal compass that tells them what's right, what's wrong, and when things are out of balance. And that can be something that can serve them in a really positive way. This is also an energy where maybe somebody who would have this position, because it's with the midheaven and IC, might want to have it all. So they might want to, have this really prominent career path, or they might want to, experience something in their career, but also have a really full, really exciting, really fulfilling home life. And so maybe there's a strain or a difficulty in maintaining balance between one's career's goals and aspirations and what they kind of want behind the scenes, what they want to come home to after work. But there is a very unique ability for them to maintain that balance and find that balance with those two energies, with that opposition. And so next on the list, we have the trine aspect. So trines are 120-degree aspects if you're looking at a degree-based trine. And the orb that typically is given is about 7 or 8 degrees. And that's the orb that I like to stick with as well for a degree-based trine. But trines can also be between planets that are in any sign of the same element. Trines are always going to be the same element and the same polarity. And so that's what they have in common. What they don't have in common is the modality. And so they tend to work very harmoniously together because trines are positive, harmonious aspects. They indicate a talent, a gift, a beneficial energy or experience that a person is prone to having in their lifetime. They can indicate specific events. They can indicate, enhancing certain relationships. It really depends on where the trine is showing up in your birth chart and the planets that are involved and the signs that they're in. So the element of the trine shows how those planets are going to be working together in harmony in the best possible way. And so you either are going to have an earth trine, an air trine, a fire trine, or a water trine. Earth trines are going to work together in a way where the planets are very grounded. It can bring actual physical material manifestation and material benefits in some way, whereas the water trines are going to work together in a way that's more intuitive, that's a little bit more flowy, that's a little bit more subjective or creative in some way. It's going to work together on the emotional and intuitive level. Where we're looking at air trines, it's going to be a little bit more cognitive. It's going to be more about communication. It's going to be more about connection. And then we have the fire trines, which are going to be more about action and actually doing something out in the world, where these two planets are going to work together to create something or to facilitate some sort of action in a person's life. And so because trines are the most positive aspects that you can have, they are so naturally positive that they actually cause malefic planets to behave more positively. And so the way that a malefic planet will be impacting any planet in a trine is going to be inherently positive. So with Mars in a trine, it can indicate a natural motivation, a natural energy, a natural optimism that's stimulated through the trine energy between that planet and the other planet. If it's Saturn, it can indicate this natural self-discipline, this ability to kind of take things slow and do things step by step in order to achieve the greatest possible outcomes. It can indicate stability and longevity. It can indicate somebody who is able to see something through to completion and put in the work for the long term. Obviously, trines with benefic energies are going to be experienced as very benefic. We have benefic planets in a benefic trine doing beautiful, harmonious things where a lot of really great gifts and benefits can show up very naturally for a person in that area of their life. And so it enhances whatever planets are in the trine, whatever the opposite planet is that's in the trine, in a much more positive and much more powerful way. But again, all trines are positive, so it doesn't really matter what planets are involved. They're going to be interacting in a way that's beneficial for one another. Trines can also sometimes indicate passivity and laziness, especially in the feminine signs, which of course are the earth and the water signs. And sometimes when there's a water sign energy or earth sign energy, especially water sign energy, and, a lot of benefic energy. So we have this energy of maybe Venus that is more relaxed. It's the most relaxed energy of all the planets. It's an energy that brings things together, but it also is kind of just like mushy. or Jupiter, which is very expansive and indulgent. Both of those energies are actually kind of indulgent in their own way. Then this can breed like laziness. The thing that's also interesting with trines is that people don't often recognize the benefits of the trine, even though everyone else in their life recognizes the benefits of that person's trine or their luckiness or the ease that they experience in that area. So that is also another unique aspect of the trine, where people have this innate gift or this innate talent or this innate thing that shows up in their lives so frequently, and it's just so natural to them that they don't even appreciate that not everybody has it the same way that they have it. And so that's kind of an interesting thing that's a little bit different with the trines. So people tend to appreciate their sextiles more than their trines for some reason, even though their trines are bringing more benefits, because it's just the way things are for them. And so they don't see it any other way, or they have a hard time until maybe they go out and interact with other people or see, the world as it is with age. They have a hard time understanding cognitively that not everybody experiences the world this way. All right, so let's bring up my chart example on the trines. So in this chart example, we have Mercury in the sign of Sagittarius. Mercury rules the mind, it rules communication, it rules our logic, our reason, our intelligence. And in the sign of Sagittarius, it's technically at its detriment. And so this is an energy that can be prone to missing the details, miscommunication, not understanding things very clearly, and maybe not communicating very clearly and effectively. However, because Mercury is in a trine in this chart with Jupiter, which is the great benefic, it brings expansiveness. Jupiter is also about higher intelligence and higher reasoning. It's about experiential knowledge gained through actual real life direct experience. This makes this person highly intelligent. It makes them able to communicate ideas in a way that is big picture, but still effective and really well thought out and very easily well received by other people. Even if mistakes are made in communication, when you have a Mercury-Jupiter trine, people tend to be very forgiving of those mistakes, or they tend to not even notice because the delivery is so enthusiastic and so jovial and so over the top that you just get really pumped about what it is that they're saying, and you might not even notice that like neglect of the details, or something going awry, or something being said in an incorrect way, or the facts being mixed up a little bit, or something like that. Even if that is the case, other people don't tend to care. They don't tend to notice because the delivery is so effective and so positive. So Mercury trine Jupiter makes somebody very highly intelligent. And this is a special intelligence that has to do with, especially in the fire signs with this fire energy, experiential knowledge. So I talked about the experiential knowledge portion of this with Jupiter, but this makes it even more the case because fire signs are about action. They're about motivation. They're about doing something active in real life in order to gain or obtain that wisdom, that knowledge that they might deliver or communicate to other people. And so when somebody with this type of trine, Mercury trine to Jupiter, especially in the fire signs, tells you something or says something, they're sharing knowledge, they're sharing information that they have usually gained through direct real life experience. They've taken action on this before they've delivered it to somebody else or taught it in some way. And Mercury trine to Jupiter can make somebody a very effective, really passionate, really enthusiastic teacher. It gives a person a very optimistic mindset because of that Jupiter expansion and optimism, where they tend to see the bright side of everything. This is not a pessimistic energy. This is an energy where you're always able to see the light at the end of the tunnel. And so finally, we have sextiles. Sextiles are 60-degree aspects where planets are 2 signs apart in the same polarity or gender. And so sextiles are either going to be masculine in nature or feminine in nature. And these 60-degree aspects, when you're looking at a degree-based sextile, typically have an orb of about 6 or 7 degrees. That's the orb I give them, especially because they're a little bit weaker than the trines. And so you're going to want them to be closer and more exact. And really with sextiles, the sign-based sextile, yes, it's a thing, but it's not going to be felt as potently as as a trine, an opposition, a square, a conjunction. It's going to be the weakest of all of these Ptolemaic aspects. And so the planets have their polarity in common, so they're either going to be masculine or feminine in nature. Because sextiles are considered to be supportive, positive aspects, the polarity of the sign that the planets are in is going to tell us whether the energy is being expressed more actively in a masculine sign or more receptively in a feminine, or in two different feminine signs, I should say. Sextiles don't express themselves in a way that's as effortless, where it's just coming natural to somebody like the trines do. And so it's interesting because people often recognize the gifts of their sextiles because they have to do something, they have to work for it. They're like, oh yes, I do have that natural quality, or yeah, things do tend to work out in this way if I do this, that, and the other thing. So it's not something that's just coming to them and that's just happening, that they take for granted like they do with the trine. However, you do have to activate the sextile, you do have to take action on it, you do have to work with the energy in order for it to manifest. And so that's one of the main differences between the sextile and the trine. The trine is just flowing all harmoniously with that elemental energy on its own, whereas the sextile is requiring a little bit more effort on the part of the person whose chart this is. Just like with the trines, sextiles involving malefic planets are still considered to be positive, and so Mars can add an extra layer of motivation, of enthusiasm, of activation, of fight and fire, of willpower, of ambition, and Saturn can add an extra layer of self-discipline, of hard work, of delayed gratification, of all of those really wonderful things that Saturn can bring, like longevity and stability and groundedness. Along the same lines, sextiles that have benefic energies, they tend to express themselves in a way that's going to be a little bit more benefic, and it's almost a little bit more like a trine because it does flow more harmoniously and more naturally, although again, you still do have to activate the energy of the sextile in order for it to manifest, in order for it to actually work for you. All right, so let's get back into my chart example here. And so in this example, this individual has a sextile between the moon in the sign of Libra and Mercury, which is in the sign of Sagittarius. And this is a very close sextile within 3 degrees. This is in the masculine polarity. And this is another energy that helps benefit or enhance the otherwise problematic energy of Mercury because it's in its detriment. With the moon represents a person's emotions, intuition, their subjective sense of reality. And for this person, their intelligence is not just book learning and it's not just experiential knowledge. They have an intuitive inner knowing that helps bring balance to their ideas, to their thought processes, to their decision making, where they just know what's right. If they activate their intuition, if they listen to it, they have this innate intuitive intelligence that they're able to not just utilize for decision making, not just to utilize to make up their mind about something, not just to utilize to discern information, but they can utilize that to be a very effective communicator. And so this is somebody who can read somebody's emotions very easily and know what the right thing to say in that situation would be. This would bring about a very active form of social intelligence where they can really understand, how to deliver information in a way that's going to be well received based on that emotional response that it will elicit. And so it's active in that way, but it's also, the moon. So even though it's an active energy because it's in the masculine signs, there's still that subjective energy there with that intuitive component, that emotional component, that feeling component. So reading people's emotions, being able to understand and express not only their own emotions, but other people's emotions, and being able to utilize that emotional intelligence in any situation that involves communication and connecting with other people would be one skill set, especially because the moon in this circumstance is in the 11th house of friendship. All right, you guys, so that is my video on the 5 major aspects, the Ptolemaic aspects in astrology. Let me know below in the comments section if you learned a little something, and make sure you check out the Cosmic Academy of Astrology if you want to really learn how to understand planetary aspects and put everything together to read a birth chart, because that goes way beyond what I can do in a short YouTube video, and I would love, love, love to see you in class. And again, subscribe to my channel. I'm going to be doing more videos on planetary aspects that go way more in depth and in detail, including information about aspect patterns in the future. So you're going to want to make sure that you're subscribed so you don't miss that. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you in the next one. Bye, everyone.